Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel, and today we are continuing the read along for ErHa Volume 2. I'm actually a minute early today and I'm gonna celebrate that very small success because everything else in my day so far has not been great. Today was just one of those days. I had an amazing sleep. You would think that the day after having a really good night's sleep would be wonderful, and that is unfortunately not the case. So anyway, I am gonna be starting a little bit early so that we can give people time to arrive if they so choose. But I always have a tendency to come in a little bit late, and then we don't really have time to allow people to arrive, which is not great. So anyway, I hope the audio is okay. It was making weird sounds before I pressed live, but it should be fine now if I did the right thing. I'm not sure. Okay, so while we wait, let's quickly just recap. So we had Moran kind of having like a drunken crisis over the fact that he's jealous of people interacting with Chuaning and seeing Chuaning performing with the Guqin, which obviously was something that was only seen by him in their past life. That's something he's gonna have to deal with. Hi, how are you guys? I'm glad the audio is okay. Okay. So yeah, if I seem a little bit frazzled today, just apologies. I'm gonna try my best to just kind of walk it off and keep going. And yeah, I'm really glad that I have this to kind of have looked forward to for today. But yeah, so we are on page 138 for anyone who's reading along with their actual physical books. We are about to start with chapter 58, and I am vaguely, who am I kidding? I'm really excited. Not even just vaguely. So, I think, can we get started? It's been like 1 minute. I'm never good with time. I think it's my ADD. So I always feel like I've been talking for much longer than I actually have, and then it's only been like a minute. So that's great. And then other times time gets away from me and I talk way too much. So okay, I have my coffee here. We're gonna be doing the 10-minute break probably on the dot of the hour, but it will depend on how the chapters pan out, because I feel like sometimes it's easier to finish a chapter and then go whenever the chapter's finished, regardless of if it's nicely timed. But yeah, okay, I am finally gonna get started. Just a bit? Okay, we shall wait just a bit. How have your guys' day been? I hope it's better than mine. Let me just grab a little bit of coffee. I have coffee here with me. Oh, let me just quickly check something while we are here. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to see, I kind of forgot that I just posted Moonlight Chicken. Has the day been good? That is good. Sorry, my brain is all over the place today. The day wasn't going well. With ErHa, it's just gonna get better. Okay, so that makes two of us. We're gonna be fine. It's gonna be good. We're gonna start laughing because Moran is an idiot like always, and we love him for it. And then the entire day will just get better from there. That's what I tell myself. Okay, I think I am very impatient. I think I'm gonna cave. We're gonna start. Let me just find my space again. Hi! Okay. Are we ready? Never, but let's go anyway. Chapter 58. This venerable one feels a little hazy. Oh goodness. As a matter of fact, Moran could usually hold his liquor pretty well. It was just that on this night, in order to cover his anxieties and fake a nonchalance he didn't feel, he downed 5 whole jars of pear blossom white wine, grinning the whole time until his consciousness grew hazy. When he was half dragged, half carried back to his room by Shimei and collapsed on his bed, Moran's throat moved. He wanted to call Shimei's name. But habit was a frightful thing. During all those years in the past, the one by his side hadn't been the moonlight of his heart, but oh my word, okay. But the mosquito blood he had grown sick of looking at. The name that came out of his mouth was that of a person he had always thought he hated. Chuaning. It came out all muddled. Waning. Shimei hesitated, then turned to look towards Chuaning, who was standing by the door. Chuaning had carried Shimei back to his room, and now he walked in, a bowl of sobering soup in hand, just in time to hear Moran's murmur. Okay, sorry, that got me way too excited. Hi! Oh, goodness, okay. After the initial surprise, Chuaning convinced himself that he had misheard. After all, Moran had always called him Shizun, and it was one thing for Moran to call him Chuaning, but to call him Waning... Guys, I'm such a sucker for moments like this. His mind tracked back to the night at the Red Lotus Pavilion, when they had slept holding one another, and Moran, fast asleep, had clearly called out Waning, then pressed a kiss to his lips, light as the touch of a dragonfly on water. Was it possible that in Moran's heart there actually was a little bit of I'm not here. I don't want to read further because I know his hopes are just going to be crushed by some sort of misunderstanding once again. Chuaning smothered the thought before it could take root. He had always been straightforward and resolute, except when it came to matters of the heart, regarding which he knew well he was a dawdling coward. Shizun, Shimei's bright eyes, unmatched in elegance, looked at him with uncertainty. You... No, it's nothing. Since Shizun is here to take care of Aran, I'll take my leave. Wait, said Chuaning. Does Shizun have any other instructions? You're all leaving for Peach Blossom Springs tomorrow. Mm-hmm. There wasn't much of an expression on Chuaning's face. A little while passed before he spoke again. Go get some rest. Make sure to take care of one another out there, and... He paused. Come back soon. Shimei left. Chuaning walked to the bedside, face impassive as he propped up Moran and fed him the sobering soup, spoonful by spoonful. It's interesting. I kind of expected Chuaning to, be dismissive and be like, no, you take care of him. I wasn't intending to take care of him. So this is a surprise. Moran disliked the sour taste and coughed it all up not long after. However, he did sober up enough to open his eyes and stare, half awake, at Chuaning. He mumbled, Shizun? I'm here. For some reason, Moran started laughing, his chuckles framed by dimples. Immortal Gurgur. Oh, goodness. Chuaning gave him a silent stare. After that, Moran plonked right back out, sprawled on his stomach, worried that he might catch a cold. Chuaning stayed by his side, filling his blanket back up and tucking him in now and again. Chuaning deserves the world, and I will not be convinced otherwise. Outside the room, A number of the disciples weren't yet asleep as they stayed up to count down the new year. Most of them were gathered inside in groups, chattering and laughing, playing paigor, or doing magic tricks. What would music tricks look like? When the hourglass hanging in front of the loyalty hall finished trickling, signifying the changing of the year, the disciples rushed outside to set off fireworks and firecrackers. The night sky instantly filled with silvery flowers and branches of fire. The deafening sounds outside woke Moran from his hazy sleep. He cracked open an eye and pressed a hand to his throbbing temple, but the sight that greeted him was that of Chuaning, sitting by his bedside, his handsome face composed and impassive. "Did the noise wake you up?" Chuaning asked lightly when he realized that Moran was up. "Shizun." Moran woke fully, startled despite himself. Why was Chuaning the one watching over him? Where was Shimei? He hadn't said anything in his sleep that he shouldn't have, had he? Moran snuck an apprehensive glance at Chuaning's face, and only let out a breath he was holding when it seemed that nothing was out of the ordinary. The crackling of firecrackers continued outside. The two stared awkwardly at one another for a while. "Okay. Do you want to go see the fireworks?" asked Chuaning. "Where's Shimei?" asked Moran. They spoke at practically the same time. It was too late to take anything back. Oh, hell! Moran's eyes opened wide, startled, and he stared at Chuaning for a long while as if he didn't recognize him. A moment passed in silence, and then Chuaning got up nonchalantly to leave, though he turned at the door. "Everyone's celebrating the new year, so he's probably not asleep yet. You should go look for him." "Can I go cry in a corner? Is that an option?" It was only to be expected. Chuaning had such terrible temper after all. Even if he had summoned all his courage to ask Moran to go watch the fireworks together, of course he had been rejected. He shouldn't have said anything. How humiliating. Chuaning returned to the Red Lotus Pavilion and sat by himself beneath the high-tongued tree that bloomed year-round. There, alone, with a cloak wrapped over his shoulders, he watched the brilliant flowers blooming across the night sky. In the distance, the disciple quarters were warmly lit. Cheerful laughter drifted over, but none of it had anything to do with him. He should have grown used to this long ago, but for some reason his chest was tight. Maybe it was because seeing the merriment of others made it harder to return to his own solitude. Quietly, Chuaning watched the fireworks bloom, 1, 2, and listened to the voices of people wishing each other Happy New Year, 3, 5. Leaning against the tree, he closed his eyes, feeling a bit tired. Chuaning wasn't sure how much time had passed, but he suddenly felt an intrusion past his barriers. His heart lurched, but he didn't dare open his eyes. He heard the sound of breathing, slightly winded, and familiar footsteps came to stop not far away. A young man's voice spoke, carrying a hint of hesitation. "Shizun?" Chuaning did not reply. "I'll be leaving tomorrow." He remained quiet. "It's going to be quiet for a while before I can come back." Oh, goodness. Why is this so painful? Like they're going to be together, but only one of them knows it. Actually, there's nothing going on tonight, and we have to get up early tomorrow, so I think Shimei probably went to bed already. The sound of footsteps came nearer and stopped very close. "So, if you still want to, Though Moran opened his mouth, the rest of the sentence was swallowed by the bang of an exceptionally large burst of fireworks. Chuaning's eyelashes fluttered as he looked up. Backlit by splendid rivers of stars in the night sky and the scatterings of flowers like silver frost, a handsome young man stood before him, pitying and a little bashful. Chuaning remained silent. He had always been prideful, and he didn't care for company born of pity. But right now, looking at Moran, words of refusal suddenly wouldn't emerge. Maybe the wine had gotten to him too. Chuaning felt a sting in his chest, but also a warmth. "Since you're already here, sit down with me," he said, then added softly, "I will watch with you." Guys, this is not something I thought we would be getting. Like, both of them relatively sober and doing something in agreement. The bar is so low, but I'm so happy about it. Oh, goodness. Okay, where am I? I lost everything. Where am I? Okay. He gazed up at the sky with an impassive expression, but the fingers hidden in his sleeves had nervously curled. He didn't dare look closely at the person beside him, instead fixing his eyes on the fireworks above and at the boundless night sky sparkling with glittering brilliance. "Has everyone been well these days?" Chuaning asked quietly. "Mm-hmm," Moran replied. "We became friends with a cute little Shidi, who mentioned we mentioned him in a letter to Shizun. How is Shizun's injury?" "It's nothing. Don't blame yourself." A firework burst into the sky, scattering resplendently. That night, fireworks and lanterns lit the sky, firecrackers crackling non-stop, and the faint smell of smoke filled the snowy air. The two of them welcomed the new year underneath the flowering tree. Chuaning was a man of few words, but Moran continued to look for things to chat about until he finally grew tired and fell asleep. My soul is happy and healed right now. I don't know how long it's gonna last, but we're gonna appreciate it nonetheless. Okay, hold on. I just wanna zoom in a little bit here. Okay. Yeah, whoops. Oh hell. No, I lost my place. We said it was somewhere here. Okay. Yeah, no, it is definitely like a bit sad, especially because it feels like they're leaving each other, even though technically they're not. But again, only one person knows it. And because of the age gap, it's not even like, oh, maybe he starts to care for Chuaning in his younger form, and they can start to have an understanding in that way. I do hope there's still some form of it, but obviously there can't be anything in a romantic sense with them while they're away at the Peach Blossom Springs. So that is unfortunate. Early the next morning, Moran woke up, still underneath the tree, with his head in Chuaning's lap, and a hefty but soft fur cloak covering him. It was Chuaning's firefox cloak, smooth and exquisitely made. A little startled, Moran looked up to see Chuaning leaning against the trunk of the tree, deep in slumber. His long eyelashes drooped over his cheeks, curving slightly with each breath, like butterflies in the wind. Had they really just fallen asleep under the tree like this? How had that even happened? With Chuaning's obsessive-compulsive nature, he should have got back to his room to sleep, no matter how tired he was. How could he have been willing to settle for carelessly resting under a tree like this? And this fur cloak, had Chuaning covered him with it? I mean, would have had to. So the only real option in the situation is he let you rest on his lap and covered you with the cloak. And there's no other way to look at it, which is I'm loving. Moran sat up, his ink-black hair a little disheveled. He stared, draped in Chuaning's cloak, a bit mystified. He hadn't been that drunk last night. Although some things were a little indistinct, he could more or less remember most of it. Even running to the Red Lotus Pavilion of his own accord to welcome the new year with Chuaning had been a sober, conscious choice. Thank you for clarifying that. I Yes, okay. Moran had obviously hated Chuaning once, but when he'd heard him ask, "Do you want to see the fireworks?" and when he had watched him turn around forlorn to leave with his head lowered, he had, in fact, felt an ache in his heart. He thought, well, they wouldn't see one another again for a long time anyway, and he didn't really feel much grievances towards him in this life. And Chuaning was lonely, so it was no big deal for Moran to keep him company till the morning, once in a while. And so he had brazenly come to join him. When he thought back on it now, he felt like he was being really Chuaning woke before he could finish the thought. Damn it! Shizun, Moran stammered. Chuaning rubbed his temple, his brows drawn slightly together in the haze of having just woken up. You haven't left yet? I just woke up. Lately, for some reason, every time Moran looked at Chuaning's impassive face, his silver tongue tied itself into knots. I'm such a sucker for that, but also I just realized, like, probably the potion, or whatever it's called, the pill, that Chuaning drank in order to regain his, like, normal form for a while is probably going to be wearing off pretty soon, so he better get Moran to leave as soon as possible. Moran was stock still for a moment before suddenly remembering that he was wearing Chuaning's cloak. He hurriedly took it off and scrambled to wrap it up around his Shizun instead. While draping the cloak over his shoulders, Moran noticed that although Chuaning wore several layers of clothing, his outfit was still a bit thin without a cloak, as the outer garment, especially in all the snow. The thought made his movements even more frantic, and he ended up tying his own fingers into knots while trying to fasten the tassel cord. Moran stared at his fingers in bewilderment. Chuaning glanced at him and reached out to untie it. I'll do it myself. Oh goodness. After a long moment, Moran said, "Okay," and appended in a mumble, "Sorry, it's all right." Moran stood and hesitated. "Shizun, I have to go pack and eat breakfast, and then I'll be setting out." Would you like to go get breakfast together?" Guys, why is all the character development happening 2 minutes before they have to leave? Damn it. Pa, the second after Moran said that, he wanted to bite his own tongue and die right at that instant. The hell was wrong with him? What had he just done that for? Maybe because he saw the regret that surfaced on Moran's face immediately after asking that, Chuaning paused, then said, "I'll pass, you go ahead." Moran was deathly afraid that he might say something even more outrageous if he stayed any longer. I'm going then." "All right." After Moran left, Chuaning sat expressionlessly under the tree for a long while, before slowly getting up with a hand on the trunk for support. But he didn't make any further movements. His legs were thoroughly numb from having served as Moran's pillow all night. And here I was concerned that it was something more, like, serious. With all the pins and needles, he couldn't walk. He stood there, suddenly, for a good while before his blood circulation returned to normal, and he could finally hobble his way back inside. Sure enough, after spending the night outside in such bitterly frigid weather, even with the high-tongue trees shielding them from the snow, he still ended up catching a cold. Achoo! Chuaning sneezed, the corner of his eyes already reddening. He covered his nose with handkerchiefs. Damn it, I probably caught a cold. The young elder wielder of the 3 holy weapons, and the foremost eminent Zongshi, who was sought after by all the sects of the cultivation world. The mere sight of Tianwen tamed the 4 seas, and the white of his robe bested all the colors of the world. He was such an impressive character. He could even be said to be the strongest cultivator of the era. Unfortunately, even the strongest person was bound to have weaknesses. Chuaning's was that he couldn't handle the chill and easily fell ill if exposed. Thus, when they set off for Session Peak, Thus, when they set off from Shizun Peak, not only had Chuzong's Shi turned small again after the pull wore off, but on top of that, he was sneezing and sniffling non-stop. And so, when the feathered tribe arrived at noon to escort them, they were met with Shumeng, Moran, and Shimei, who were perfectly healthy, and the pitiful little Shidi Shasani, who couldn't stop sneezing. I don't know why that's such a funny image, even though it's kind of sad. Okay, let me just quickly drink a little bit of coffee, and then we shall keep going. Come on. Okay, chapter 59. This venerable one is only so simple. Okay, that's interesting. There was nothing for it. Even if the little Shidi couldn't stop sneezing, they still had to get going. The feathered tribe led them eastward to a port on the Yangtze River. They summoned a self-navigating ferry, and, with a barrier shielding the vessel, set off to sea. That was the first night Moran was able to spend time with Shimei on the outing without their Shizun around. Strangely, he wasn't as excited as he thought he should be. Shimei and Shasani had gone to bed. Moran lay alone on the deck, arms folded beneath his head, looking at the starry sky. Shimei came out from the cabin with some dried fish they had brought from a fisherman earlier and sat next to him. They nibbled idly on the snack while chatting. "Aran, since we're going to Peach Blossom Springs, we might not make it to the Spiritual Mountain competition. That doesn't matter much in any case, but you and the young master are both so strong. If you miss it, won't you regret losing your chance to make a big debut?" Moran turned his head with a smile. "It doesn't matter. Stuff like reputation and whatever, that's just words. Going to Peach Blossom Springs and learning real skills to protect those important to me, that matters." Wow, I think that might have been the wisest thing we've heard Moran say so far. Shimei's gaze seemed to smile, and his voice was gentle as he said, "Shizun would be so happy if he knew you thought that way. What about you? Are you happy?" "Of course I am." Waves crashed against the wooden ferry as it rocked in the sea. Moran stared at Shimei for a while before he finally lay on his side. He wanted to tease him a bit, but he didn't know what to say. In his eyes, Shimei was pure and unattainable. Maybe it was because of this purity that whenever he faced Shimei, he found it difficult to entertain the sort of lurid thoughts he had towards Chuaning. I mean, to be fair, it's possible to have romantic feelings for someone without having sexual attraction towards them, but somehow I think Moran has just confused like pure admiration for and like familial love for romantic love. I wouldn't put it past him because he's not always the brightest. That's the only thing. For a moment, Moran fell into a daze. Shimei noticed that he had been stared at. He turned, tucking stray strands of hair that the sea breeze had blown behind his ear, and smiled. "What is it?" Moran flushed and angled his head away. "Nothing." He had originally planned to use this outing as a chance to confess, carefully, to Shimei. However, every time the words were at his lips, he couldn't open his mouth. Confession. And after that, Moran couldn't be rough or forceful with this pure, gentle person. He feared rejection, but even if his feelings were returned, he was afraid he wouldn't know how to behave toward Shimei. After all, honestly speaking, his performance during the short time they'd spent together in their last life had been quite terrible. Other than that one moment of intimacy within the ghost mistress's illusion, He'd never even kissed Shimei. Moreover, after what had happened this time around, he was no longer sure if the person he'd kissed in his last life had been Shimei or Chuaning. I'm I know it's terrible of me to say, but I'm secretly kind of glad that he's still like haunted by the thought of what really happened in that one in the past life, because it is an interesting thing and it is something that I also still wonder about. Shimei was still smiling. You really do look like you want to say something to me, though. It was as if they were separated by a paper window, and for an impulsive moment, Moran wanted to poke through the thin layer and damn the consequences. But for some reason, a figure in white who had a face that didn't like to smile flashed through his mind. A figure who always kept to himself, who looked so lonely. All of a sudden, it wasn't like Moran's throat had closed. Sorry, all of a sudden, it was like Moran's throat had closed. He couldn't say anything else. He turned back to stare at the night sky full of stars. A while passed before he said quietly, Shimei, you're truly very important to me. I know. I feel the same about you. Do you know? Moran continued. I had a nightmare once, and in it, you weren't there anymore. I was so sad. Shimei smiled. You're so silly sometimes. This is painful. And it's also like I wish there was some clarity from Shimei as well, because the way he says it is so general that I like you can't really figure out if he likes Moran in a romantic sense or if he likes Moran in a familial sense. Those are not seagulls, no, those are hadidas. Yeah, they're very noisy and frequently cause me to have to like pause reactions because the sound is so distinct, shall we say. Okay. After a long moment, Moran said, I'll definitely protect you. Okay, then I'll just have to thank my good Shadi in advance. Moran's heart caught in his throat. He couldn't help saying, I. Was there something else you wanted to tell me? Shimei asked softly. The fairy shook, and the sound of waves seemed somehow louder. Shimei watched Moran quietly, as if waiting for him to utter those last words. Moran closed his eyes. It's nothing. Why don't you go back inside and get some sleep? It's cold tonight. Shimei was quiet for a moment. What about you? Moran could be quite dim. I'm going to watch the stars for a bit longer. Feel the breeze on my face. Shimei didn't move. It was a while before he smiled. All right, then I'll go on ahead. Don't stay up too late now. See, and this is what like infuriates me to an extent, because it almost seems like Shimei knows what he wants to say and would be willing to accept it, but then why is it Moran's responsibility to take that final step? This is so confusing. Okay. Then he turned and left. The ferry sailed through the sea and beneath the boundless sky. The fellow lying on the vessel's deck didn't at all recognize what he had just missed. He was even a bit absent-minded as he tried to dig up what he really felt in the depth of his heart. He thought for a long time, but he was genuinely dim-witted. Thus, even by the time the morning sun painted the eastern skies a soft white, he still hadn't figured himself out. Now, I am clearly also the dim-witted one, because the book seems to be implying that Shimei basically invited Moran to his bed with him. But that's not how I'm interpreting it at all, and I don't know if I'm interpreting what the book is trying to tell me wrong, or, Okay, anyway. Moran spent every waking moment with Shimei, and the feelings they shared were deep and sincere. Moran had assumed he'd definitely want to confess to Shimei as soon as they were alone, that he would be unable to wait another moment. But now that this long-awaited moment had finally arrived, he found that this wasn't remotely the case. Maybe the problem was that he thought himself too awkward. If Moran rashly confessed to Shimei right away, he'd definitely startle him. Even if Shimei took it in stride, it wouldn't make for a good start. Moran was most used to the hazy vagueness between them. Sometimes his heart fluttered, and he reached out to take Shimei's hands as if he wasn't thinking, and his chest would overflow with a honey-sweet tenderness. It was such a natural feeling that he didn't quite want to destroy it, not so quickly. It was late by the time Moran went back inside the cabin, and everyone else had already gone to sleep. He lay on his sleeping mat, staring at the night outside the narrow skylight. Slowly, Chuaning's figure appeared before his eyes, sometimes silent, his eyes closed, sometimes wearing a severe expression. But Moran also thought about the way the man looked when he was curled up asleep, lonely and unassuming, like a high-tongue blossom that no one cared for because it had bloomed too high on the branch. The hatred he felt aside, Moran's past life entanglements with Chuaning had in fact been more intimate than any he had shared with anyone else in the world. He had taken many of Chuaning's firsts, and regardless of whether the man had been willing. His first kiss, his first time cooking, his first time crying, and his first time. Damn it, just thinking about it made Moran's body feel hot, and his blood rushed downward. My man, you are weird. In exchange, Moran had given Chuaning some of his own firsts as well, regardless of whether his Shizun had wanted them. His first apprenticeship, his first attempt to coax someone, his first gift of flowers, his first thorough disappointment. This book has a very good ability of like taking what could have maybe been like a sweet moment when he was thinking about Chuaning to like a very bitter moment. So I feel like the general theme for this volume is going to be bittersweetness. And the first stirring of his heart. Yes, the first stirrings of his heart. When he'd come to Shizun Peak, the person he'd fallen for hadn't been Shimei, but Chuaning. That day, the white-robed young man beneath the high-tongued tree had been so beautiful, so focused, that after only a single glance, Moran decided he wanted this man to be his master, and that no one else would do. Just when had that changed? Just when had the one he cared for become Shimei, and the one he hated his Shizun? Moran had thought about this a lot over the last couple of months. It had probably begun with a specific misunderstanding that we're about to learn about right now, I really hope. Or, like, do I want to find out though? I'm not so sure. It's interesting though because him saying that suddenly makes his relationship with Shimei make a little bit more sense to me, at least. Maybe I'm wrong, but it does kind of feel as if, he had feelings for Chuaning that he maybe didn't understand because he was too young. And then, like, because of Chuaning's actions, he started feeling as if like he couldn't have feelings for Chuaning, so it was safer to have feelings for another person who he felt was unattainable, but who was at least kinder to him, um, at least on on the surface level. So I don't know. It doesn't feel far fetched to me. Maybe it's wrong, but it does make sense to me at least. Okay, let me just quickly have some tea. What's the time? Okay, there's still 20 minutes left. Oh, oi, sorry about that. It was the first time Chuaning had punished him with lashings. The 15-year-old boy stumbled back to his room, bruised and battered, and curled up alone on his bed, his eyes rimmed red as he choked back sobs. The wounds on his back hurt less than the cold expression in his Shizun's face when he had brought Tin Wind down without a shred of mercy, like he was beating a stray dog. It was true that Moran had stolen a high-tongue flower from the medicine garden, but he had no idea how precious that high-tongue tree was, nor how carefully Madame Wang had tended to it for the last 5 years before it finally bloomed. The only thing he'd known was that when he'd walked home that night, a luminous whiteness at the tip of the branch had caught his eye. The flower's petals were clear and frosty, its fragrance mild and delicate. Moran tilted his head back to admire it, thinking of his Shizun. For some reason, his heart throbbed, and the tips of his fingers felt warm. Before he realized it, he had plucked the flower carefully and with the gentleness of movements, afraid of accidentally shaking even a single drop of dew from its petals. Through the thick curtain of his eyelashes, he gazed at the dew-laden high-tongue blossom under the light of the moon. In that moment, he had not yet realized just how pure the tenderness and affection he held for Chuaning was, nor had he known that, after that day, and for the next 10, 20 years, until his death, he would never feel it again. I'm fine. Before he could give the flower to his Shizun, he bumped into Shumeng, who had come to pick medicinal herbs for his mother in a rage. The young master dragged him to their Shizun. Chuaning turned from his scroll, his gaze icy cold, as he listened. He shot a glance at Moran and asked if he had an explanation. Moran started to say, "I picked the flower because I wanted to give it to..." He was still holding that high tongue, specks of frost and drips of dew clinging to its freshly bloomed petals, which were icy yet indescribably beautiful. However, Chuaning's gaze remained utterly cold, so cold that it chilled the molten lava in Moran's chest. Moran could no longer say the word "you." Can I cry? Am I allowed to cry? I guess not, technically. The feeling was all too familiar, because Moran was brought to Shizun Peak. Before Moran was brought to Shizun Peak, he had to scamper between courtesans and customers as he shrank into his thin, malnourished body to appear smaller and less obstructive, and he had spent every day under that exact gaze, a gaze of contempt, a gaze of disdain. A shudder ran through him. Was it possible that, in truth, he should soon look down on him? In the face of Chuaning's frigid interrogation, Moran felt his heart freeze over. He lowered his head, and his voice was quiet. "I have nothing to say. The rest was history. Because of this mere high-tongue flower, Chuaning had lashed Moran with 40 strikes until all his initial fondness had shattered to pieces. If only Moran had been able to explain himself a little further, and if only Chuaning had asked a little more, then maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way they had. Maybe the master and disciple wouldn't have taken that first step down the road beyond redemption. But there wasn't that many what-ifs. It was at this point that Shimei, warm and gentle, had appeared at his side. After returning from Chuaning's pavilion, Moran hadn't gone to eat or even lit a lamp. He had only lain curled on his bed. The stiff figure, curled up in the darkness, was the sight that greeted Shimei when he opened the door. He set the bowl of chili oil wontons in his hands gently on the table, then walked over to the bed and called out softly, "Aran?" Oh, this is so painful. At that time, Moran hadn't yet had any particular feelings for Shimei. He didn't even turn around, still staring at the wall with red, swollen eyes. "Get out," he said, voice hoarse. "I brought you some." "I said get out." "Aran, don't be like that." Mulish. Silence. Shizun has a bad temper. It just takes a little getting used to. Come, get up and eat something. Yet Moran was stubborn as a donkey, immovable, even if it dragged by a whole 10 horses. "Don't want it. I'm not hungry." "At least have a bite. If you don't eat, Shizun will get mad." Moran shot up from his bed before Shimei could finish the sentence. His watery eyes were angry and indignant, quivering slightly beneath his lashes. "Mad? What could he be mad about? It's my body. How is it any of his business whether I eat? He doesn't even want me as a disciple anyway. I might as well starve to death. It'll be less hassle for him. He'll be happier in the end." Shimei was too stunned to respond. He hadn't expected his words to prod at Moran's sore spot, and for a while he stared helplessly at the little Shidi in front of him, not knowing what to say. A long moment passed. Moran pulled himself together and looked down, long hair covering half his face. After a good while he said, "Sorry." Shimei couldn't see his face, only the subdued trembling of his shoulders and the veins on the backs of his tightly clenched fists. In the end, this 15-year-old boy was yet very young. Moran tried to hold it in for a while, but ultimately couldn't. He buried his face in his arms, curled into himself, and bawled miserably. His voice was rough and broken, hysterical and lost, pained and grief-stricken. Body wrecking with sobs, he repeated the same thing over and over. "I only wanted to have a home. These past 15 years, I really only wanted a home. Why do you all look down on me? Why do you all look down on me like that? Why? Why do you all look down on me like that?" I am not gonna cry over this, damn it. Moran cried for a long while, and Shimei sat with him the whole while. When Moran had cried himself out, Shimei handed him a spotless handkerchief and brought over the bowl of now cold wontons. "Don't say silly things about starving to death any more," he said gently. "You've come to Sertian Peak and apprenticed under Shizun, so you are my Shidi. I also lost my parents when I was young, so if you want, I'll be your family. Come now, eat something." Moran did not reply. I made those wontons. Even if you won't give Shizun any face, at least give me some, hm?" Shimei's lips curled into a small smile as he scooped up a plum translucent wonton and held it to Moran's lips. "Try one." I will let go of the theory that it is Chuaning who makes those, but secretly still my brain's like, yes, no, but maybe Shimei only said that to convince Moran to eat at that point. But I understand that this is not a reality. The rims of Moran's eyes were still red, his watery gaze fixed on the youth by his bed, but he finally opened his mouth and allowed the gentle person to feed him. Truth be told, that bowl of wontons had gone cold, and the dumplings had been soaking for so long that they were no longer as good as they could have been. But in that moment, under the candlelight, this bowl of wontons was carved deeply into his heart, alongside that incomprehensible, beautiful face with its gentle eyes. In life and death, never would either of them be forgotten. It probably began that night, when Rand's hatred for his Shizun grew ever deeper, but it was also the moment when he became convinced that Shimei was the most important person in his life. I mean, I can definitely understand that, unfortunately, but it does sound a little bit like trauma bonding, even though I don't want to really ascribe that to their relationship, because I do think that there's more to their relationship than that. After all, everyone wanted warmth, especially a stray dog who had frozen in the bitter cold so many times that the mere sight of salted roads made him shiver in anticipation of snow and the coming winter. Taishin-jun looked composing. Taishin-jun looked imposing, but he also knew the truth about himself. He was nothing but a wandering stray. A stray who was forever searching for a place where he could curl up, a place to call home. He spent 15 years searching and was still unable to find it, and so his love and hatred had become laughably straightforward. If someone gave him a beating, he would hate them. If someone gave him a bowl of soup, he would love them. He was just that simple, after all. This is a lot. Okay, what time is it? I think. Okay, it's 1 minute, like 9 minutes to the hour. So I think I'm gonna pause it here, quickly take my 10-minute break, and then I shall come back because we are now on chapter 60. So it feels like a good place to stop it for now. So I will see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, we are back. I hope the audio is still okay. Just let me know if it's still fine. Because I don't want to like assume that it's fine, like I've been doing the last few times. Though luckily, it hasn't been an issue. But better to keep on checking. Okay, so we are. Where were we? Chapter 60. I will give it like 1 minute because I know I technically came back a little bit early, but okay, great. Okay, then we are on chapter 60 as I mentioned, page 159. And I have tea now because I had coffee earlier and now I have tea, and apparently I am a caffeine addict. Okay. Chapter 60. This venerable one discovers a secret. Ooh, please let it be the identity of Shasini, because I will be a very happy person if that happens. On the other hand, I can understand maybe not wanting to reveal it yet because the like situations you could create because of the hidden knowledge is just too good to pass up on. But still, I kind of want it. Okay. Boosted by the spells cast upon it, the ferry travelled quickly. By the next morning they had reached the port of Yangzhou. Envoys at the were at the harbour to receive them, with well-bred horses at the ready. The party ate breakfast at the harbour, but since the feather tribe didn't require sustenance, you know, sometimes it kind of sounds like I live right next to a highway, even though that's not the case. Sorry about that. They ate breakfast at the harbour, but since the feathered tribe didn't require sustenance, their escorts sat by the edge of the harbour with their eyes closed to rest their spirits. Dawn had only just broken, and there weren't many merchants around conducting business. Conversely, the deckhands had risen, and they gathered in threes and fives to chow down on the porridge and steamed buns, as well as to peek and steal curious glances at the newcomers from time to time. As these beefy fellows, in simple labourer's garb, chewed their meals, bites and pieces of their conversation fell upon Moran's ears. "Oh, hey! I recognize their clothes. They're people of the lower cultivation realm." "The lower cultivation realm is so far away, and they don't interact much with the sex from the area, so how would you know?" "Just look at the emblem on their vimbrons. It's the exact same as the one on the Holy Night Guardian." "You mean one of those wooden devices that repel evil?" One fellow crunched on a pickle as he peered at Shumeng's sleeve. "Is that one of the ones that was created by Chuaning?" "Ayo, that's right," he exclaimed. "Who was the one who made the Holy Night Guardians again? I heard it was I heard it was the Yuheng Elder of Sishun Peak." "Who's the Yuheng Elder? Is he as powerful as our Guyu sect leader Jiang?" "Huh, who knows? Who's to say anything about the world of cultivators?" The deckhands spoke in heavy Sioux dialects, and Moran couldn't quite comprehend them, but Chuaning understood what these people were saying. When he heard that his invention, the Holy Night Guardian, was being successfully distributed through the common world, he could only feel comforted. It made him start thinking about the future. After they returned, he would work on prototypes for lighter wheelbarrows that were easier to use and thereby do more good. "Chuaning, I love you, never change." Once breakfast was done, the group left with haste. Not 4 hours later, They reached the foot of Mount Juhua. It was still early in the day, and the winter sun had only just reached its zenith. Millions of threads of golden light came kissing down from it like silk. They imbued the snowy summit with a crystalline luminescence, making it glitter magnificently. Upon the slopes of the peak, peak were hundreds of luscious ancient pines that remained evergreen. Each stood resolutely in the frost, much like a hermit cultivator with an immortal air. we know of one. Sleeves lowered and eyes half-lidded, deadly silent where they towered on either side of the mountain path. It wasn't for nothing that the mortals called the summit of Mount Jufeng the unmortal world. At the foot of the mountain, the envoys of the feathered tribe whistled thrice. At the sound, a light golden sparrow with vibrantly charming feathers flew out of the white snowy scenery and landed lightly before them. The group followed the sparrow's lead, heading west the entire way until they came to the curtain of a turbulent, tempestuous waterfall. Will the Xiangjun please step back? The leader of the feathered tribe envoys stood at the fore, her hand imitating the hand of Buddha, and she silently recited a spell. Then she pursed her scarlet lips and gently blew into the wind. A shocking beam of flames appeared in mid-air and stroked towards the waterfall, where it divided the water curtain in half. Ooh, that's a cool imagery. The women of the feathered tribe breezily turned around and smiled. We cordially invite you to enter Peach Blossom Springs. They followed their escort and passed through the barrier. After crossing it, the scenery before their eyes suddenly brightened. The scene before them was vast and with no end in sight, as if it was an entirely different world, one filled with pink blossoms. Peach Blossom Springs was a sheltered land with few connections to the cultivation world. While it couldn't be compared to the real land of immortals, much less spoken of as its equal, it was nonetheless rich with spiritual energy. The scenery within the springs looked as if it had come out of a painting, its colors elegant and delicate. After walking for a while, the group realized that here the four seasons seemed to change and blend into one another in a manner wholly unlike they did in their own world. With the women of the feathered tribe leading the way, they first passed through the wilderness where the sound of coursing rivers roared in their ears, accompanied by the cries of monkeys coming from both shores. Then they approached the outskirts of a city and saw vast farmlands of crisscrossing field paths where wheat swayed in the breeze. Finally, once they had entered the city fortress, they found immaculate and detailed buildings as far as the eye could see, with eaves both tall and grand. The capital of Peach Blossom Springs was magnificent and beautiful, and in terms of size and amenities it was comparable to the lively city centers of the mortal realm. The only difference lay in the spring petals and drifting snowflakes that danced together overhead, the blue birds and white cranes that took flight together in flocks, and the passing folk of the feathered tribe. These beautiful people carried themselves with ethereal grace, flowing and picturesque, and every one of them looked like an otherworldly celestial who had just stepped out of an illustration. However, though this was a sight that the disciples had never before beheld, they had already laid eyes on the fantastic sights of Jincheng Lake, so this was no longer quite as awe-inspiring. They came to a fork in the road and met one of the feathered tribe who wore a grand feathered cloak, white with gold embroidery depicting a phoenix. She stood by an ancient tree so tall it reached the skies. The flame marks on her forehead was much richer red than that of her peers, signaling that her powers were far greater than the rest of them. The envoys leading the way brought the group before her. Then each bent on one knee to the ground to bow as they greeted her. Great immortal lord, the 4 Shizun of Shizun Peak have come. Thank you for your labor. You may stand down. Understood. The beautifully dressed, feathered tribeswoman smiled softly, and her voice was clear and stirring, like the cry of a young phoenix. I am called 18. By the grace of the elder immortal of my family, I was granted the grand title of Great Immortal Lord of Peach Blossom Springs. That is such a mouthful. But just like side note, the description for the place that they're at now is great. It sounds so beautiful. We are most thankful to that my lords have been willing to show us the courtesy of coming to train in our humble abode. Should the Shizun find the reception to be in any way inadequate during their stay here, please do forgive us, and do not be afraid to let us know. Such beauty, and such grace when she spoke, she certainly gave a good impression. Shimeng didn't like it when men were better looking than him, but he was at the age when he was beginning to become aware of the fairer sex. So naturally he didn't dislike ladies who were so beautiful that they seemed to have emerged from a painting. He smiled. Xianshu is too kind, but this name, 18, certainly is odd. Might I ask after Xianshu's family name? I have no family name, she replied, gentle and courteous. I am only 18. That sounds so strange. Moran laughed. If you're called 18, then is someone here named 17? He'd meant it as a joke, but to his surprise, 18 smiled. Shenzhen is wise. 17 is my zizi. Moran blinked, stunned. We of the feather tribe are born from the fallen feathers of the vermilion bird, 18 explained. When our cultivation was still weak, we took the forms of the crested ibis. The first to cultivate a human form was the elder immortal of my family. The rest of the feather tribe are thus named in order of when we attained human form, starting with 1, 2, and so forth. I am the 18th, and so I am named 18. Moran had absolutely no words. He had originally thought that Shu Zhengyong was as bad as it got when it came to doling out names. Oh, the shade! Never had he expected to find someone who was even worse, let alone people who referred to themselves with numbers. Look, Moran, you cannot talk. We have seen the way you named, like, the different eras that you ruled in, and they're not good. So you cannot judge. Then 18 said something that left him even more thunderstruck. Come, let's get down to business. This is your first visit to our lands, and you aren't yet familiar with the training rules of Peach Blossom Springs. In the mortal realm, cultivation has for centuries been divided by schools and sects. In this place, things are different. We of the tribe have always been very clear in our division of labor. There are those who specialize in defense, those who specialize in attack, and those who specialize in healing. There are 3 divisions in all, and your training will thus also be conducted accordingly. Moran smiled. That's brilliant. 18 nodded towards him. Much appreciated. Xia Xinjun, when the cultivators from Guyi who came here several days ago heard of this training method, they were quite displeased. Moran was mystified. Defense is defense. Did you guys hear that? Some people. Sorry, where was I? Defense is defense, attack is attack, and healing is healing. Isn't such a clear split a good thing? What were they unhappy about? I mean, on the one hand, I can kind of get it, because if you specialize in one thing, then it'll give you more time to become really good in that one thing. But if you learn a little bit about everything, that might also be useful in its own way. So, pros and cons to both, in my opinion. You see, there is one gongzi from you. Sorry, I'm struggling with this name. Gu Yu Ye. Okay, there is one gongzi from Gu Yu Ye who belongs in the defense and was thus supposed to reside with the other Xianjun of that division. However, his Shijie belonged to attack and will therefore need to train and live with the Xianjun of the attack division. While I don't quite understand the affections and relationships of mortal kind, I could tell that the gongzi was quite unwilling to be separated from his sworn sister. Haha, what's up with that? Wait, hold up. Moran abruptly stopped laughing as realization dawned on him. His eyes wide, it's finally dropped. Not only do the different divisions train separately, they have to live separately too? That's right, 18 replied, confused. She didn't understand why his expression had suddenly changed. Moran's entire face turned green. Was this some kind of bad joke? Not so great anymore, is it? An hour later, Moran, who had failed in his bargaining with 18, stood dumbfounded before the bright and spacious little four-sided courtyard residence and sank into long, deep silence. Moran, Shumeng, and Shasini belonged in the attack division and had thus been sent to the east side of Peach Blossom Springs. The east side wasn't just any small allotment of land, but the region where all the Xianjun who belonged in the attack division resided. There was more than 20 of these courtyard residences, each large enough to house 4, and there were also mountains and lakes, as well as streets and markets built very much like the ones in the mortal realm. It seemed that because the Feather Tribe knew their guests were going to live here for a long time, they had constructed these to alleviate homesickness. Oh goodness, so it's basically on the other side of the city, more or less, that they're separated. It's not like a short distance. Okay, now I am starting to get why the other dude was not happy about it. I can't bring myself to feel too bad about Moran and Shimei being split up. I'm sorry. Though how that is gonna help him get together with Chuaning, I have no idea. Okay. As for Shimei, since he belonged in the healing division, he had been sent to the south side of Peach Blossom Springs. It was exceptionally far away from where Moran and the others lived, and they were even divided by a barrier that could only be traversed with an access token. This meant that although Moran and Shimei were both within Peach Blossom Springs, they would essentially have no chance to see each other outside of daily training, for which all 3 divisions gathered to learn the basics of the Feathered Tribe's cultivation method. Okay, so at least they'll still see each other. It's just not going to be as much as Moran hoped. That wasn't even the worst of it. Moran looked up and eyed Shumeng past his thick curtain of lashes. Shumeng was circling the whole yard, obviously planning to pick the most comfortable residence for himself. Moran could feel the veins on his forehead pop in spite of himself. Shumeng, that's right, frickin' hell. From today onwards, he had to live in the same courtyard as Shumeng for the entire stay. For the next long while, he would in all likelihood have to be thoroughly steeped in 2 of the 8 great sufferings of life: separation from loved ones and the meeting of enemies. Oh my word, he's so dramatic. The Feathered Tribe had gone from the upper cultivation realm to the lower to find their chosen few, and by the time they reached Soshin Peak, They had been at the end of their journey. Thus, those sent from the other sex had already settled in, and Shimeng soon discovered that one of the residences of their little four-sided courtyard was occupied. Weird. I wonder who settled here. Shimeng mumbled as he glanced at the mattress cover being hung to dry in the yard. Whoever it is, it must not be someone who makes much of a fuss. Moran said, What do you mean? Let me ask you this. Which residence are you picking? Shmeng's expression grew immediately guarded. What are you planning? I've already made my choice. The one in the north that faces south is mine. If you're gonna fight me for it, then I'll... Shimeng hadn't yet figured out what he was going to do before Moran cut him off with a laugh. I don't like rooms that big, so I'm not going to fight you for it. But here's what I want to ask. If this residence was still empty, he pointed at the modest abode that had already been claimed, would you swap with him? Shimeng gazed at the simple little thatched cottage before glaring at Moran. Do you think I'm dumb? Of course I wouldn't swap. Which is his point, is that the person who was here first didn't pick the best spot in Shumeng's eyes, basically. Moran laughed. That's why I said that person isn't someone who'd make a fuss. See, when he came, all 4 residences in this courtyard was empty, but he didn't pick the best one. He chose that itty-bitty hovel. If this fellow isn't a fool, then he's a humble gentleman. Shimeng fell silent. The analysis certainly wasn't wrong, but he felt like his face had been ripped open by the hidden knife in Moran's smile. If this other man was a gentleman, foregoing the best residences to pick a dilapidated hut, then didn't that make Shimeng a stinky, vulgar, common man? A petty cheapskate? But Moran hadn't called Shimeng out by name, so Shu Gongzi couldn't very well yell at him. However, neither could he endure this. His entire face flushed red. Whatever the case, I'm used to living well. Shimeng choked out resentfully, expression dark. I can't stand for run-down accommodation, so whoever wants to be a gentleman can go right ahead. I don't care. Having made his statement, he turned and left. I love that. I just want to check something. Okay. What's the time? I think we're making good progress, I hope. Thus, the 4 differently styled residences of the courtyard residence were claimed by different masters. Shimeng chose the exquisite residence in the north, with pale walls and black shingles, and a threshold lined with gold, the most luxurious abode. Moran picked the stone cottage to the west, which had a peach tree planted by the entrance, its flowers at the height of their bloom. And so Chuaning picked the bamboo building on the east side, where the tender, gentle bamboo trees were illuminated by the setting sun to gleam with a brilliant jade-like splendor, and on the south side was that humble, simple thatched cottage reserved for the gentleman whom they had yet to meet. Chuaning had not yet recovered from his cold, and his head still spun wickedly, so early on he excused himself to rest. Shmeng stayed with him for a bit, but this little Shidi didn't know how to play it up and act pitiful, nor did he want to listen to stories. Instead, he only cared to wrap himself up like a small sticky rice ball in its leaf, wrapped up, and sleep in muffled peace. Shimeng sat on the edge of his bed for a bit, but eventually got bored and dusted himself off and left. In the courtyard, Moran had pulled out a chair and was putting his legs up, his arms pillowed beneath his head as he watched the golden sun sink in the west, the blazing rays peeling leisurely away, When he saw Shumeng emerge, he asked, "Is Shashidi asleep now?" "Has his fever gone down? If you care about him, why don't you go inside and see for yourself?" Moran laughed heartily. "The little guy probably isn't too deep asleep yet. My clumsiness might rouse him." Shumeng gave him a look. "Well, at least you're aware of yourself. And here I thought you were just like Mama's cats and dogs, who only know how to idle about in the yard and be lazy." They really do not like each other. But it's such a sibling relationship, though. "Huh, and how do you know I'm being lazy?" Moran twiddled a peach blossom between his fingers and looked up with a smile. "The time I spent here sitting in the yard allowed me to discover a major, shocking secret." Is this the thing that was in the chapter title, or are we going to get like an actual secret later on? Shmeng obviously didn't want to ask, but he was nonetheless curious. After bearing with it for a good while, his face stiff, he worked up an expression of indifference and muttered, "What major secret?" Moran waved him closer and grinned. "Bring your ear closer and I'll tell you in confidence." I don't trust this. Though he was incredibly unwilling, after a long pause for consideration, Shmeng lowered his gracious ear. Moran leaned in close and chuckled quietly. "Huh, got you, Dameng." Shmeng's eyes went round in shock, and he exploded out in outrage, seizing Moran's lapels. "You lied to me! How immature can you get?" Moran laughed. "How have I lied? I did discover a secret, but I also don't want to tell you. That's all." Shmeng's dark brows hardened. "If I continue to believe you, then I'll truly be a fool." The two bickered like a bird picking a dog and a dog snapping at a bird. Moran was about to teasingly say something else to provoke his cousin even further, when an unknown voice came from behind them, laced with confusion. It said. "Are the two of you new trainees as well?" This man's voice was clear and crisp, smoother than that of your average youth. Moran and Shimeng turned their heads back to see a man dressed in practical, close-fitting clothes, standing there against the wind, lit by the crimson blood red of the remnant sun. This fellow had a striking appearance, with inky black brows and handsome, spirited features on his honey-coloured face. He wore a hard crown of black jade fastened atop his head, and though he was neither towering nor burly, he carried himself with a tall, upright dignity and a noble bearing. His pair of long legs were especially noteworthy. Strapped as they were into those close-fitting trousers, they looked even more shapely and powerful. Straight and gallant. Moran's expression instantly changed, and it felt like the blood and sins of a past lifetime were flashing before his eyes. Oh goodness, this is like, what was it, the thing that someone commented in the previous live stream? "Oh, have I murdered you before?" Like, this is giving very much that. I'm assuming this is someone that he knew in his past life as well. Oh goodness. It was as if he was looking at a silhouette kneeling in a tempest of blood. The body's collarbone shot through with a steel chain, half the face's flesh ripped away. Yet this person refused to yield, willing to die rather than surrender. Oh, that is grim. Moran's heart trembled, like a crystal dewdrop that hung from a leaf. He couldn't describe what it was he was feeling. If there was anyone whom he had respected and admired in his previous life, then the person now standing before his eyes was definitely one of them. So the honorable gentleman who was to live with them was actually this fellow, huh? Of course they had to freaking stay mysterious about who said this fellow is. But we do get art of him, and it's a beautiful illustration. There we go. I hope you guys can see it properly. It is so pretty. Chapter 61. This venerable one is really great. The two bros stopped bickering and rose to their feet at the same time. The person in front of them had an extremely dignified air. Shimeng stared for a moment before he finally reacted, nodding. That's right. Who are you? Shimeng had been unruly since birth, and even though Madame Wang had taught him etiquette over and over again, he'd never taken it to heart. So when he asked for other people's names, he never used honorifics, and neither did he offer his own name first. It was honestly quite rude. However, Moran knew that this wasn't someone who would stoop to Shumeng's level. After all, this was, I am a disciple of the Rufeng sect, Ye Wang Shi. As expected, the young man was calm and composed, and he didn't get upset. Below his dark, black brows was a pair of eyes that shone like scattered starlight, exceptionally bright and piercing. May I inquire after your name as well? Yu Wangxi? Shimeng frowned, muttering, Never heard that name before. Must not have been... Oh my word, Shimeng, that is really rude. Must not have much of a reputation. His muttering wasn't loud, but there was no way anyone who wasn't hard of hearing could have missed that. Thus, Moran discreetly tugged on Shumeng's sleeve to get him to show some restraint, before masking the emotions in his own eyes and smiling lightly. I am Moran of Sishan Peak, and the one beside me is my ill-mannered little brother Shumeng. Shumeng pulled away, throwing him a fierce glare. Don't touch me. Who's your little brother? Oh, Shumeng, you, Moran sighed. He turned to Ye Wangxi, eyes smiling along with his lips. My younger brother is a bit stubborn. Please don't mind him, Ye Xiong. It wasn't that he suddenly decided to change his entire attitude and start being courteous about Shumeng. Rather, it was that Ye Wangxi was an outstanding genius among his peers. Although Ye Wangxi had yet to make a name for himself, in their previous lifetime, Ye Wangxi had been a second only to Chuaning in the entire cultivation world. Heaven knew how greatly Moran had suffered because of Ye Wangxi in his previous life. To see him after his rebirth, still sharp as a knife's edge, an upright hero, pure and noble, even if he couldn't get into Ye Wangxi's good graces, at the very least Moran never again wanted to face him as an opponent. It's moments like this more than anything else that convinces me that Moran really does want to turn a new page, turn a new leaf. I can't remember what the expression is. Anyway, because we know it. It's been a lot of chapters and pages of him not following in his past footsteps, but I feel like if he genuinely still harbored some ill intentions at these moments where he met people who dealt him deadly blows in his past life, there would be some resentment there, and the fact that there isn't, to me, says a lot. Okay, sorry. I mean, except for Chuaning. We know Chuaning is the exception to everything. It was already a lot having Chuaning beat him black and blue. If Ye Wangxi was added to the mix, how could he ever live in peace? Ye Wangxi was a man of few words, so after a brief, polite exchange, he returned to his own residence. As soon as he left, Moran's expression reverted to his annoying as hell grin. He elbowed Shumeng. What do you think? What do I think about what? That person, Moran replied. You like him? Think he's good looking? Moran, I don't think you know how that's coming across. It sounds like you're asking him if Shumeng is attracted to him. Shumeng gave him a befuddled look and scoffed. Weirdo. Moran laughed. The four of us are living in the same courtyard, so we'll run into each other around every corner. You should be glad that he's the one we're living with. Shmeng was puzzled. The way you talk, it sounds like you know him already. Of course, Moran couldn't tell him the truth, so he returned to his usual clownery. Nope, I don't know him, but I judge people by their faces. He's good looking, so I like him a whole lot. Disgusting, Shmeng spat. Moran laughed, waving his hand as he turned around and flipped an offensive gesture at Shmeng behind his back. He then lazily walked back to his own little stone house and barred the door with a clunk, shutting all of Shmeng's cursing and swearing outside. The morning of the next day, Moran got up early. Their hosts had delayed cultivation practice for 3 days so they could grow accustomed to life at Peach Blossom Springs. Moran freshened himself up and saw that Yu Wangxi had already left on his own, and that the other two hadn't woken up yet. So we went for a solitary stroll through the streets. Within the thin layer of morning fog, quite a few cultivators glided by with their light steps, rushing to the individual cultivation grounds. Moran passed by a breakfast stall and saw fresh pots of steam-fried buns. He thought of his little Shidi, who was still sick, and walked over. I'd like 8 fried buns and 1 bowl of sweet congee to go, Miss Shopkeeper. The feathered stall owner didn't even lift her head to reply. That will be 6 feathers. Moran stared blankly. 6 what? 6 feathers. I like the touch of the fact that the currency is different and that, Moran hadn't thought of that because it seems like such an obvious thing, but it seems like something that in some books might just not even be an issue. The author would just forget to write about that. So, am I supposed to go find a chicken and pluck a couple of its pinions? The feathered shopkeeper raised her eyes and gave him a look. No feathers and you still want food? Go away, get lost. Caught between annoyance and amusement, Moran was about to ask again when a familiar voice came from behind him. A hand wrapped in bandages reached out with 6 gleaming, resplendent golden feathers pinched between a finger. Here, Miss Shopkeeper, I'll pay for it. The feathered shopkeeper took the feathers and, not wanting to waste any more time, turned to pack up the breakfast to go. Moran turned his head to see Ye Wangxi standing by his side, tall and handsome, his presence elegant. Thank you very much. Moran grabbed the steaming, piping hot buns and the sweet congee, and he went to walk alongside Ye Wangxi. If I hadn't run into you today, I'm afraid we might have gone hungry. No worries, Ye Wangxi said. Miss 18 doesn't have the best memory, and she always forgets to give newcomers some feathers. I ran into you by chance, so it's no skin off my back. Don't worry about it. Do you need these feathers to do business in Peach Blossom Springs? Yes. Where do the feathers come from? They're plucked. Plucked? Moran was slightly dumbfounded. These feathers really were plucked straight from the bodies of birds? Wouldn't the local birds end up completely bald? That's a fair question. Ye Wangxi glanced at his shocked face with amusement. What are you imagining? In Peach Blossom Springs, there is a place called the Ancestral Abyss. Legend has it that it was where the vermilion bird ascended. The bottom of the abyss is filled with roaring flames. It's hot beyond measure and difficult to endure. Not a single inch of grass can grow there, and no beast can survive it there. As Moran listened to this description, his mind went to the blood-red sky that he had seen in the distance when he passed through the city outskirts the day before. Is the abyss near the northern end of the city? You are correct. What does that have to do with the feathers? It's like this. Although no other creatures can survive in the vicinity of the ancestral abyss, a flock of frenzied demon owls live within it. They make their nests with the fire, hide during the day, and come out at night. The feathered tribe use their feathers to refine their cultivation. So that's how it is, Moran grinned. No wonder they want to trade goods for feathers. But you must be mindful. When the demon owls come out at night, their feathers turn into the ordinary sort, no different from those of other owls. Even if you catch them then, they won't be of any use. Only at daybreak every day, when the sun rises in the east, while the owl flock returns to their ancestral abyss in the hundreds and thousands, the moment right before they enter the abyss, their feathers again turn gold, and only those have any value. Oh my soul, that's so many specific things that need to be right before those feathers can have any value. That sounds like an absolute nightmare to get. Huh. Isn't that basically just mandatory Qigong practice? If your skills are subpar, then you'll fall in and get barbecued. But if you don't have harvest feathers, then you'll probably starve to death. Moran couldn't help but click his tongue. That's pretty rough. Are you perhaps not good at Qigong? Asked Ye Wangxi. Moran chuckled. Just so. That won't do. The owl's movements are swift and violent, no slower than those of the falcon or hawk. If you don't practice diligently, then you'll go hungry after a couple of days. I see. Seeing Moran lost in thought, Ye Wangxi sighed. I've acquired quite a few feathers, and for the time being I have no shortage thereof. If the three of you need some, just ask me. Moran waved his hand again, smiling. How could we do that? Let's just count this as an initial loan of 6 feathers from you to me. I'm going to go eat some food, but if I can harvest some feathers tomorrow, I'll pay you back. Thanks a lot. I like that. I'm hoping that they'll become friends. Moran bade farewell to Ye Wangxi, then carried the congee and buns back to the courtyard. Shumeng's residence was empty. He'd probably woken up and gone bored, then gone out for a stroll. So Moran went to Chuaning's bamboo house. Chuaning wasn't awake yet. Moran set the congee and the steam-fried buns on the table, then went to his bedside, where he lowered his head to take a look at him. All of a sudden, a familiar feeling washed over him. This little Shidi's appearance as he slept. Why did it seem similar to a certain person? Oh goodness, I didn't think that would be something that kind of started to make him wonder. Sorry. Moran couldn't remember who his Shidi resembled. Oh, of course you couldn't. He only had a fuzzy impression of someone else who slept like this. Someone who always curled up in a ball on their bed, cheek pillowed on folded hands. Exactly who was it? While Moran was busy getting lost in his thoughts, Chuaning woke up. Chuaning rolled over and saw the person beside his bed, at which he suddenly opened his eyes wide. Moran? How many times have I told you? You should call me Shishong. Moran ruffled his hair a bit, then felt his forehead to take his temperature. It seems like your It seems like your fever broke. Come on, get up and eat some food. Eat food? The child on the bed repeated blankly, his messy hair making his face look even cuter. Look at how your Shishong cares about you. I got up early to go buy breakfast. You should eat while it's hot. Chuaning got off the bed, dressed in his spotless white inner robe, and walked towards the dining table. On top of the dining table there was steam-fried buns with thin skins and crispy bottoms, with jade green shivers of chopped green onions and black sesame scattered over them, all placed on a lotus leaf. Next to the buns Next to the buns, there was a small bowl of Longan and Asmotus, I can never pronounce that right, Kongi. It was soft and sticky, but simultaneously thick and rich, as well as piping hot, with a cloud of steam rising from it. The usually strong and steadfast Yuheng elder was suddenly unsure of himself. For me? Huh? Did you buy all this for me? Did Chuaning kind of like forget that he's in his child form and that, like, at least from Moran's perspective, he would have no reason to treat Shasini badly? Moran was stunned for a second. Sure did. He watched Chuaning, who looked hesitant and unsure. Moran considered this and smiled. Hurry and eat before it gets cold. Although Chuaning had been part of Sishan Peak for many years, and everyone respected him, almost no one ate with him due to his icy, stiff personality. They were even less likely to bring him a serving of breakfast from the dining hall. Sometimes he watched the disciples taking care of each other, and though he was unwilling to admit it, he couldn't stop his heart from being slightly jealous. And so, faced with a bowl of porridge and a couple of buns, he couldn't bring himself to actually eat them. Can we just protect Chuaning, please? This poor man. A long while passed in silence. Moran watched Chuaning sitting on the small stool, staring at the food in front of him and not moving his chopsticks, and wondered if the food might not be to his tastes. What's wrong? Moran asked. Is it too greasy for you? Chuaning looked back at Moran mutely and shook his head. He picked up his spoon and scooped up a mouthful of congee. After he blew on it, he took a careful sip. If he were still the beautiful, frigid, and distant Chu Zongshi he usually was, eating congee in this manner would have made him seem elegant and refined, as though he was practicing restraint. In the body of a child, he just looked a little awkward and pitiful. Moran misinterpreted his hesitation. Do you not like longans? You can pick them out and leave them by the side then. No biggie. No. This little Shidi's face wasn't too expressive, but when he looked towards Moran again, his crow-black eyes were soft. I like it. Oh, huh. That's good then. I worried that you didn't. Chuaning's thick curtain of lashes swept downwards. I like it, he repeated quietly. No one's ever taken care of me like this before. He lifted his eyes to glance at Moran. When he spoke again, it was earnest. Thank you very much, Shishong. Moran hadn't expected him to say something like that, and he was left feeling stunned. He wasn't naturally a kind person, and he didn't particularly like kids. He only treated Shasini well because his skills were unusually good for his young age, and he seemed like a junior worth befriending. Moran had only been thinking practically, but when he was met with a Chuaning who treated this matter so sincerely, he found himself blushing with shame. However, he also thought that there was something a little odd about what his Shidi had said. After waving his hand to tell Chuaning that he didn't require thanks, Moran asked, Has nobody ever brought you breakfast before? Chuaning nodded expressionlessly. Does the Shunji elders, his disciples, not know how to look after one another or something? I don't hang out with them much. What about before you came to the sect, when you lived at your old house? Did your mom and dad? Moran stopped, unable to continue that sentence. His little Shidi was quick-witted and pure as snow. What sort of parents would have the heart to leave this kind of kid on top of a mountain to cultivate, and never come to visit him ever again? It seemed like Shasini had suffered the same experience as Shimei and himself. As expected, Chuaning said calmly, My parents are no longer around, and I didn't have any other relatives, so there was nobody to look after me. Moran was silent for a long while, before he let out a big sigh. Originally, I just wanted to be friends with the kid because of one, his cultivation level is quite high, and 2, he is steady and mature, unlike the typical rowdy ankle biter. Who would have thought that we came from the same background? I like it's sad that it has to be under these circumstances, but I do like the fact that Moran is unknowingly getting to know Chuaning, and hopefully once he finds out that Chuaning is Chuaning, and like the anger that is probably going to be there starts to subside, then it'll mean that he can start to process that these things are things that he didn't know about Chuaning, and they're probably the truth. Okay. When Moran looked at the little Shidi in front of him, he found himself thinking of his own childhood and remembering those years that had been strife with bitterness and hardship. A surge of emotion rushed through his chest and filled him with sympathy and a sense of intimacy. Suddenly, he said, "There was nobody to take care of you before, but from now on, there will be. You've already called me your Shishong, so from here on out, I'll take care of you properly." It sounded like Chuaning hadn't expected him to say this, and he was a bit surprised. Sorry, it seemed like. After a while, his features melted slowly into a tiny smile. "You'll take care of me?" If you stick with me from now on, I'll teach you meditation and sword techniques." Chuaning's grin widened. "You'll teach me meditation and sword techniques?" Moran interpreted his expression and scratched his head. "Don't make fun of me. I know that your cultivation level is already pretty good, but you're still young, and you have lots to learn. There's a lot of disciples under the Xianji elder, and he probably isn't able to train you individually. What's wrong with learning a bit from me? You have a holy weapon, you know. Sorry, I have a holy weapon, you know." Chuaning was silent for a moment. "I wasn't making fun of you," he said finally. "I think you're great." Guys, I can't deal. Like, Chuaning's finally able to say the things that he's feeling without the repercussions of, like, how it would be if he were himself, which is so sad to say, but still. Baby steps. Chuaning would never have been able to say something like this before. However, since his body had become smaller, it seemed like his personality had grown gentler and softer as well. It was as if he had been hiding under a cloak of darkness and could finally remove his rock-hard mask. As for Moran, although he'd lived through 2 lifetimes, this was the first time someone had praised him like this and said, "You're great." Even though the one praising him was just a little kid, he was still at a loss as to how to respond, overwhelmed as he was by the pleasant surprise. For a while, Moran could do nothing but sputter. His skin, which had always been as thick as a city wall, flushed red. He repeated what had been said to him, stuttering, I'm great? You really think I'm great?" Suddenly, Moran vaguely recalled that when he was young, he had wanted to be a good person. But the small, gentle wish of his, much like all of his other little wishes. "When I grow up, I want to ask Li Zizi from the makeup store to marry me. When I have money, I want to eat pancake fritters every day. If I could have just 2 pieces of barbecued meat for every meal, I wouldn't trade it even for immortality." Oh my word, this is so sad. All of it, in the end, had become nothing more than memories, blown away by the wind and scattered in the snow. Okay, what is the time? Okay, there's like 5 minutes left, and we are at the end of the chapter, so I think we might just end it here for today. So we are on chapter 62. This venerable one arrives at an ancient Lin-an. Okay. I can't believe, like, the little secret that Moran found out, we never found out, or it might not even have existed. Like, that feels like clickbait. I know it isn't, but it feels like it, and I'm so frustrated because I had hoped there would be something more to it. And maybe there's something that we'll only find out way later on, but I'm not sure. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I feel like we're at a place that I'm really enjoying because it's so nice to see Chuaning and Moran interacting without the burden of their true identities, like causing a rift between them. And it also kind of sucks a little bit because I know that I'm gonna be so sad once that barrier re-emerges. Like once Moran finds out. I don't even know if it's gonna be in this volume though. It feels like it might not even be in this volume with the pace that we're going at. But yeah, I'm keen. I really like also that we're getting to see more of Moran's like past before everything went sour, because it kind of does help to humanize him a little bit. I liked him before this point. I feel like Meat Bun did a really good job of making me like him despite all the horror that he does to Chuaning. But it is nice to kind of get to see the more like young part of him. I'm not sure. I do, yeah. No, this Chuaning is just amazing, and I want to protect him with everything in me. And I'm so glad that Moran is starting to feel the same way about baby Chuaning, because Chuaning needs protection. And it's time that he realizes this. So even if it's only with the child version of Chuaning that he doesn't even know is the child version of Chuaning, it's progress. I will take it. Um, okay, so I think I'm gonna end it here. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will be back tomorrow for another live stream, another 2 hours, probably around about the same time. But I will put up the new um like live stream for reminder closer to the time. I just need to make sure when I'll be able to be live tomorrow. So anyway, bye.